can no longer sue if you get sick from pesticides, or actually over 10,000 chemicals. You can't sue if you get sick from them.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Birth Lounge podcast. Y'all, okay, I know that you know that we have to be skeptical of things. We gotta ask questions. The hard questions, the taboo questions, the questions that not everybody is comfortable asking. And a lot of you are asking those questions. A lot of you are questioning the organizations that make decisions for us. A lot of you are asking the questions when it comes to standard of care in the hospitals and things that are recommended to you in a blanket statement. And you're starting to question the larger governing bodies and industries that regulate a lot of our lives. But has that extended to big food, to the farming industry, to the regulatory bodies who determine what is and isn't safe for the food that we consume every day? As a daughter of a farmer, I learned this at a young age, that you should question where your food comes from. You should question what sort of chemicals are put on your food. You should think about if you can make this food at home, would that be cheaper, cleaner, better for you and our family growing up? Now that I'm an adult and I'm expanding my own family, I've done things like making our own butter, and I buy local from a local farm, and we get our meat from other places than the grocery store. But have you ever thought about the pesticides, fungicides, insecticides, herbicides that are put on our food? Have you ever considered what glyphosate is and does, or deeper than that, what it does to our body and the systems inside our body, like your gut microbiome, your lymphatic system, or even our mental health? Today I'm joined by Kelly Ryerson, who works at the intersection of agriculture and health. Kelly is the co-executive director of American ReGeneration and also founded the news site Glyphosate Facts. She has a degree from Dartmouth, her MBA from Stanford Business, and she completed training in integrative health coaching at Duke. She also regularly collaborates with regenerative farmers, scientists, policymakers, and the media to address agrochemical damage to our soils and, beyond that, our bodies. Today, Kelly and I are diving into all the things that you need to know about the impacts of glyphosate on our health, both immediate and long term. We're going to be talking about things like how corrupt is Monsanto and what does it mean now that they've been bought by Bayer? Does spraying your soil for so many years with pesticides create things like dead soil? Has it impacted the uptick in cancers across our country? How do you know if the food that you're eating is filled with glyphosates or glyphosate free? Are we really supposed to be reading every single label, or are there a few trusted sources that we can rely on to help us get to the bottom of the big food industry? Kelly's also going to be talking to us about how to safeguard your home. what you need to know about your backyard garden and the water coming into your home. What kind of filters should you consider putting on your sinks and showers? Are there specific food brands that are better, cleaner than others that we should focus on when shopping? And finally, we're going to be talking about the FDA, the EPA, and the USDA's involvement, or shall I say corruption, in the widespread use and cover up of glyphosate. If you're new to this conversation, buckle up because it's going to totally rock your socks. If you're already on this train of starting to question our food sources and how much it impacts our long-term health, this episode is going to completely blow your mind. If you're watching on YouTube, get ready because I have so many jaw-dropping, literally my jaw drops to the floor multiple times in this conversation, moments where I just cannot believe this is going down in our country. One of the most important things that I gathered from this conversation is that this is something that we should care about. If you are someone who is of the age of having babies, maybe you're the parent of young babies, or maybe you're raising a family of young children, this topic should be on your mind, plus how you can take action to stop the glyphosate pandemic. It's ruining our mental health. It's impacting our children. It's wrecking our gut health and leaving us with chronic inflammation, autoimmune diseases, allergies, and neurodevelopmental issues. So many of us walk around totally unaware of just how corrupt our food sources are in the U.S., and I'm ready to totally blow the top off of that. So without further ado, Kelly, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you for coming on the show. I know that my guests and my listeners are probably like, what is a glyphosate person doing on a birth and pregnancy show? But you guys, you know, I am the daughter of a farmer. You know that long-term health is super important to me. You know that the more that I look into our government agencies, the less I trust them. And the more that you follow the dollar, the more corruption that you find. And I've been very open with you guys about that. I have been super transparent about how do you take control of your life and your health care. And one of the things that I knew growing up, but didn't really understand how deep it was glyphosate in our food and our air, and how actually little regulation there is when it comes to our food. And so that's why I wanted to have Kelly on today. And so, Kelly, I think before we dive into all of that, I'd love for you to start by explaining what is glyphosate, what is it meant to do, and why should it be on our radar?
Yeah, absolutely. This is so glyphosate is the most used pesticide of all times globally. It was originally looked at to be a potential pharmaceutical of some type a long time ago, decades ago. And when they didn't find, the chemists weren't able to find a pharmaceutical use for glyphosate, it kind of was put on the shelf. Later, Monsanto, which people probably know the name of, is the most diabolical agricultural chemical company of all time. They found that it had really strong herbicidal properties, meaning it could kill plant life, so weeds. And so they were thrilled to patent this as a weed killer. They put it together with some other things like a surfactant, like a soapy substance, put the glyphosate, the surfactant, and some water, and they called this Roundup. So Roundup is the pesticide that you've likely seen around all over in different hardware stores and even Target. And I've been furious to see this pesticide sold right next to the baby department at at Target specifically. It's like, oh my gosh, could there be something that should not be anywhere near a baby? So this was developed, and in 1975, so we are now at the 50-year anniversary of the use of Roundup. It was launched onto the market. It was sold for use in landscape and in farming, and it was used to a large extent, but not as large as something called atrazine, which unfortunately we still use and is a severe endocrine disruptor. But it was relatively cheap and very effective at killing weeds. And in 1996, the use of glyphosate absolutely exploded because what Monsanto was thinking is how can we're going to lose patent on this eventually. How can we make sure that we keep on making a lot of profit by selling this chemical? How can we expand our business? So at that point, there was the birth of, maybe people here have heard of GMOs. You might have a sense of if they're good or bad. The GMO was actually developed as this business plan. So they were able to take the seeds of corn and soy and cotton, and now there are a lot more, but originally that's what it was. And they were able to genetically modify it so that farmers could plant these seeds. You could go in and spray Roundup all over that farm, all over those crops. And the crop that they wanted to have live, so the corn, the soy, the cotton, would live because it's resistant to the effects of glyphosate. But everything else would die on the soil. So now we have, and farmers embrace this because, like, gosh, this makes it so much easier. We're not having to hand pick weeds anymore. This is incredible. Glyphosate was sold as being non-toxic and safe enough to drink. So they thought, excellent, I am no longer poisoning myself. And it was rapidly adopted. And you just see this explosion of use then over the next decade. So that really led to the explosion. But a second use, one in which we are very, very directly impacted by, is that it is often used as a pre-harvest desiccant. So this is how our 90% of our dietary exposure happens in terms of exposure to glyphosate. And what happens is the farmer will go a few weeks before harvest and spray the entire field with glyphosate or paraquat. Actually, there are other chemicals too, but glyphosate's been the main one. Spray it to make it all die off evenly to facilitate a much easier harvest so that the whole field is dry. You can just do one pass for harvest, and then they harvest that, they send it to the mill, and next thing you know, it's in your food. So when then people, organizations, or run tests on products like cereals, breads, it's also done on legumes, if you will find these ridiculously large levels of glyphosate that then is contaminating our food supply. So it went from being this small project to being something that's so omnipresent in our world that now it's sprayed so much that you find it in the rain, you find it in water, you find it in the air, you find it in personal products, in the cotton tampons, you are finding it in your food, you find it in breast milk, you find it in brain tissue. This chemical has become so pervasive. And unfortunately, people don't know because it's obviously invisible.
Now, is it a PFAS? Is it a forever chemical, or do we have detox pathways in our body that can get rid of it?
It is not a PFAS, but it likes to hang out. I believe that the manual still says that it'll wash away quickly, but in terms of soil persistence, it can last a long time, like 20 years in soil that's sprayed. It isn't a thing where, like, even 30 minutes later or whatever, it's not there. And if it's sprayed on a surface like concrete, if you're cleaning, if you're using it in your landscape, you're using it on patio, it will not go away until it's washed off. And so that means any little bare feet that are out there walking on it, including paws, this is a really dangerous thing because it goes up through the skin. And that is how a lot of the cancer cases have come about from exposure to it. And it also bioaccumulates. So when you're exposed over time, the amount that you're contaminated by and you hold in your body increases. And I was really curious about the impact of when I was pregnant with my daughter. And when she lost her first baby tooth, I decided to send that baby tooth into the lab. It came back positive for glyphosate in my daughter's baby tooth because I had been eating things. And unfortunately, when I was pregnant, I didn't know about glyphosate. So I was just eating this and that. And so, but it has been shown that it goes down the umbilical cord, across the placenta into the developing baby. And hence, that's how it became in her baby tooth. So, really shocking.
Yeah, that is really shocking. So I'm pregnant with my first, and I do a lot of clean eating and I try and buy organic, but I'm acutely aware that organic probably doesn't mean what we all think it means and that there's very little regulation. And so just because something has been slapped with an organic label doesn't actually mean that it's organic or doesn't actually mean that it comes from a pesticide or insecticide free type farm. So how do we find glyphosate free food? Are we looking for specific brands? Are we reading labels for specific things? What does it mean for us as consumers and how do we protect ourselves?
Yeah, it can be really overwhelming, particularly because if you are, a lot of organic food is imported. And unfortunately, the United States doesn't test and really regulate international organic food to the same extent that they do American food. So if you are having something that is American organic, you're at least can feel some comfort that you know that they are very strict on American farmers. If you are getting things from other countries, there's a high chance that there's going to be a larger level of contamination. And there are so many things that are wrong with that. First, of course, just on behalf of the farmers, the organic farmers in the United States are oftentimes their prices are higher because they're doing it the real way. Whereas then the international market dumps their things that have been sprayed into the United States. We let it come where then consumers are buying it and getting contaminated. So the system's really messed up. So what I like to do, and not everyone has this ability, but many do now, is really buy my food from farmers markets as much as I can because you know that it's local, you know that it's organic. If it weren't, there's only so much you can do without having a handheld test to see, but your chances are going to be greater just knowing your farmer locally. The other thing is that there are some always still look for that organic seal because, and for your listeners that don't know, if in organic foods, that seal means that they can't use synthetic chemicals and pesticides or they can't be GMO. It's really a great safeguard in terms of what you're picking. But once again, when you're picking fresh things that have been sourced internationally, be a little bit wary of that. The other thing you can do is there is something called glyphosate residue free, which is a label that has been put out by the Detox Project. And they don't have that many products yet, but occasionally I'll see this label on it that says glyphosate residue free, which is an awesome thing to see. And it may be on a product that doesn't even have, that's not organic, but they have gone to a big extent to limit glyphosate contamination.
Now, what about, and I don't trust Bill Gates as far as I can throw him, which is not far because I'm not a strong person, but what about the new things that he's launching? Is it like peel or whatever it
Appeal.
is? What is it?
Appeal. Oh gosh, this is just so frustrating. So, now for several years, I've actually been arguing about appeal. And unfortunately, there are people in the food movement that think this is the best thing ever, one of them being Dr. Mark Hyman.
Really?
And yeah, I don't know if he's an investor. I don't know. Maybe he thinks it's safe. I don't know what to say, but I was really upset to see it because I know that a lot of people are actually, for years now, Appeal has actually been used on organic food and non-organic food, but they didn't have to label it. And so our avocados and things and apples, organic apples, have been having this Appeal coating on them with no label.
Wow.
So recently I saw all this social media around how, oh no, organic just allowed Appeal, but actually I think they're being forced to acknowledge that it exists because it's been silently used on all of these things. Like it was to the point where I wanted to know if the avocados I was buying at Whole Foods had Appeal on them because I knew Whole Foods had Appeal. And they wouldn't put it on the avocado. You'd have to go into the back and ask to look at the outside of the box to find out if, and they all were Appeal. And so what Appeal is it's this idea that if you can coat the outside of whatever the fruit or vegetable is, that you can make it not rot as quickly, basically. And so they say that it's a really safe product. I have seen lots of people actually that get really inflamed lips and allergic reactions to the product. I don't like it. It's scary to think that this is now we're going to further corrupt the organic system when already I feel like those of us who are purchasing it are just looking for the cleanest thing possible. And if you do buy, and I actually to this day can tell which avocados have had the appeal coating put on them because you buy them, they look like they're not quite ripe yet. If you cut into that, it's already rotten inside because it's been so long just sitting there looking great on the outside and it absolutely has not preserved the inside. It's just a rotten thing. So I stopped buying the avocados actually at Whole Foods and now I get them more as a treat from my farmer's market, which fortunately is in California. So we have access to like fresh avocados.
That's amazing. If you follow me on Instagram, you guys know that, I mean, I love a good farm anyway because I grew up on a farm, so I'm certainly not unbiased. But I visit our local farm here probably once a week and I get whatever is fresh and in season. And I love the farmer there, and we've become somewhat of like little friends. I don't know if he would consider me a friend, but I look forward to seeing him at least. And I feel like he just is so knowledgeable and I can ask him all sorts of questions. And it's just really nice to have a plug for whole, safe food in your area, especially when we are continuously learning kind of how corrupt our food system is. And I feel like every single day there's something else coming out about our food system that takes us aback and makes us gasp and say, oh my God, are we even safe getting food at the grocery store anymore?
Oh, absolutely. I know it's very, very frustrating, particularly when you're on a healing journey or you're wanting to provide your kids with the very best thing you can as you become like more aware. And certainly when I became a mom, I became much more aware and conscientious of what I was putting in my body, but particularly theirs more than anything. So it can be hard.
Yeah. Okay, so what are all these things doing to our body? I assume they are giving us gut issues. I assume that we're seeing an uptick in allergies. I assume our lymphatic system is probably taking a hit. What kind of things are we seeing in our like internal systems from these pesticides and insecticides?
It is so outrageous, just the number of things that these pesticides are doing to us. And I just like to just generally state, I'm so worried day and night about this. It's just why I've decided to dedicate my life to it because I can't stand the stupidity of repeatedly killing en masse all life. Pesticide, side means to kill. These chemicals that are made and put together to, I guess, make farming easier, to make sure that you're not exposed to insects, to all these things. They are meant to kill. They are not only going to kill one thing.
Mm.
And I've been very gone many times to the EPA, which is the Environmental Protection Agency. They have an Office of Pesticide Protection that's supposed to be assessing all of the scientific research to see if things are safe or not. And by and large, things are not safe. And they continually allow these things to be pervasive in our lives. The United States is worse than any other country for this. China is manufacturing pesticides that they don't even allow to be sprayed there. We welcome them with open arms in the United States. It's disgusting. The corruption that exists at the EPA and among our political elected officials is astounding and is a disgusting depiction of human nature.
Mm.
So just with that, just want to start with that because I once I tell you these things, your mind is just going to be blown.
I'm
I'll,
scared.
I'll start with endocrine disruption. And I'll focus on glyphosate. It's not like glyphosate is even the worst of the pesticides, to be honest. There are many that are much worse. This is the one that's just most used. So that's why I tend to focus on it because we're so exposed to it. But so glyphosate, the thing that I've been most concerned about is the endocrine disruption that is coming from glyphosate exposure. So your hormones really can be messed up from exposure, even through diet. And As you're probably aware, there's been a crash in fertility in this country. We are below the ability to reproduce. I think our reproduction rate is like 1.6. In order to fully reproduce and like continue with population stability, you need to have two children per couple. So that's the replacement rate. We are now below that. And that is not, in some cases, maybe people don't want to have kids. By and large, people are not able to get pregnant anymore. So the sperm counts have crashed by 50% over the last 50 years. So is a crash that you would think everyone would be rallying around. Unfortunately, the fertility and IVF community have a multi-billion dollar industry now that prevents scientists from wanting to figure out exactly what's causing the infertility in the first place. And I was very frustrated because the Southern Baptist Convention met last year and there was a big debate about it was about whether or not IVF is something that should be supported, if it shouldn't be supported. Of course, there was lots of talk about abortion and pro-life, pro-choice. And I'm just sitting there like, how come no one is even asking why people can't get pregnant anymore? I would say that the conversation, I'd even like it to go from even being an abortion discussion to, oh my gosh, people can't get pregnant anymore. That is far more terrifying. And so what I did is I sent four different semen samples from four different guys, childbearing age, to the lab. All four came back positive for glyphosate in the semen. The scientists, many scientists have done studies that have seen that in a situation we have glyphosate and semen, glyphosate kills the sperm or slows the motility of the sperm. This is something that's happening. It's been seen in fields, like they looked at French farmers, they found them to be infertile due to glyphosate presence in semen. This means that when a man is eating whatever it is that's glyphosate contaminated, which is most things, it's crossing the blood testes barrier and getting into his reproductive, the germs. Very scary with that. It not only does that, but it also can prevent the implantation of embryos into the side of the uterus. So when you're having repeated miscarriages, it directly can be involved in that. It decreases estrogen, it decreases testosterone, it attacks prostate cells. There are so many things that it's doing. And what's frustrating is I went to the Office of Pesticide Programs last fall with a slideshow with all this research, and I was disgusted because they said that they didn't need to do an investigation into endocrine disruption because years ago they had done a preliminary look just based on industry provided research and they didn't think it was an endocrine disruptor. So why bother looking any further? And I got really mad and I presented that research to them and they just took notes and they said, okay, and they left. And of course, nothing's going to happen because that's what happens. They just are willing instead to let our population die than admit that this might be a problem. Just phenomenal because those people that work there and all these people that are protecting these chemicals, they have families, presumably. They have kids. I would think they'd want to have grandkids. I can't wrap my head around it. Atrazine is the second most used herbicide, and this is one that is banned really everywhere around the world because it's so severely endocrine disrupting. And it unfortunately is found in the drinking water of I think it's 34 states in our country. And it has been connected to birth defects, sexual birth defects. So micro penises that have the urine hole basically coming out of the wrong side of the penis in the baby boy fetuses. And if there's ever time to buy a water filter is definitely while you're pregnant and while your kids are developing. So there's a big movement right now that I'm part of. We're just thinking, okay, the re-registration of atrazine is coming up soon. I wonder if this is a time that maybe we can finally do something about it. Chances are not. And so we're just left to protect ourselves. Another thing that came through that Dr. Shauna Swan, who is a really fabulous toxicologist at Mount Sinai, she did a study where she tested pregnant women in their second trimester of pregnancy. She got their glyphosate levels in their urine because that's how you can test how your glyphosate levels are. And then when the babies were born, she measured their genitalia. And what she found is that in the baby girls, there was an elongation of the distance between the vagina and the anus. So a masculinization of the baby girls, depending on how much glyphosate was in the urine of the mother in the second trimester. So the higher the glyphosate levels, that longer elongation. So I think that there's not much of a question that we're really being stripped of our ability to reproduce, and nature is saying that this is too toxic of an environment to even provide babies to. And so it's really sad and really frustrating. And so that is the endocrine disruption piece. I could go on because it impacts all kinds of different bodily, so much. Definitely the gut, the epidemic of leaky gut, autoimmunity. Glyphosate and other pesticides are directly tied in there because they can mess with the tight junctions in the gut. And it actually, glyphosate is a patented antibiotic. It selects to kill the beneficial gut bacteria and allows the pathogenic bacteria like E. coli to proliferate in our gut. So what you're left with is this totally dysbiotic situation where we're all popping these probiotics trying to get these beneficial gut bacteria back into our system while the pathogenic ones are there just doing great. So it's like the worst kind of antibiotic you could have. I've been frustrated with this too because I have been to a lot of functional medicine conferences where they're, talking about this epidemic of leaky gut and how everything starts in the gut and like the thyroid disease, like all these autoimmune conditions so deeply connected to leaky gut. And I always am the person in the audience that says, well, can we talk about how pesticides are impacting that? Oh, yeah, it's impacting probably to some extent, but it hasn't been well studied. So I went to two different scientists and I said, if I can raise the money for you to do the study, of glyphosate's impact on leaky gut, could you do it? And one of them was at Harvard, and he said he couldn't do it because Harvard would never let him do it. And the other person was too scared to touch it. So this cover up continues. So now it takes independent funding to get scientists to be able to actually prove that this is the case and there's just so much more industry funded research than there is independently funded. So it's tricky to get that body of research that you need to be able to point and say this is obviously happening.
That is terrifying. That is absolutely terrifying. Now, do you think that a water filter that comes in your refrigerator is good enough, or should we be investing in a water filter that is outside of our refrigerator? I mean, I think a lot of us know about the Berkey system, but a lot of us are probably not in a place to afford that.
Yeah. The one that I used my refrigerator for a long time, and then I wanted one that specifically was going to be filtering out atrazine once I learned about this. And so now I have an under the counter, clearly filtered system that has its own little spout. And I can't remember what the price was off the top of my head, but it was considerably cheaper than trying to do something like a whole house water filtration system, which by the way, I tried and it failed and it was a big waste of my money.
Wow.
It was so disappointing. So now I'm just like, okay, I'm going to make my pasta. I'm going to get all my drinking water. I'm going to wash things with this filtered water in my kitchen sink. I also have some on Amazon. You can go and buy, I think for like 50 to $75, a shower head, or it's something that connects to the shower head, and it's a filter that you just replace the inner filter every so often, and it can at least get out some of these things that are coming out. I don't know that they test for atrazine because it's very specific, but at least it's going to decrease your overall toxic load.
Now, if somebody wanted to have their water tested, how could you go about this? Is this something that your average everyday American could send off a water sample from their home and have it tested for glyphosate and atrazine?
So my plumber actually sent mine off to get it tested, but the testing people didn't have the test for glyphosate and atrazine. And so, because once again, people aren't asking for it, there's a lab called HRI Labs that I usually use for all of my glyphosate testing. I think that's the only thing that they test, but they actually would probably have access to other tests if you wanted to run them. But I don't totally quote me, but I think it's someplace around $100 to send in your water sample and find out what your glyphosate level is. And you can do the same. They also will test your urine if you're curious to see what your levels are with that, and they can do hair testing as well.
And you said that was HRI Labs.
Yes,
Yeah, we'll
an
link that in the
Iowa-based
show notes.
lab.
Oh, nice. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. We'll link that in the show notes for you guys. Okay, and would you send us the link to the filters that you trust for the showers and the sinks?
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice. What, in your opinion, is the most dangerous food that has like the highest level of pesticides or atrazine in it that consumers should be really, really aware of when we're buying?
The worst to me is strawberries. And strawberries, unless they're organic. So non-organic strawberries are a really enormous concern just because of all the different kinds of things they have to use between pesticides, between insecticides and fungicides, probably herbicides. But some of the fungicides that are used on various fruits can be so incredibly toxic, and they aren't talked about as much because it's specialty crops. But that's why I would really avoid that. In fact, I really like the Environmental Working Group's list of I think it's, what is it? It's a dirty 15. No,
Yeah.
it's a clean 15, something 10. There's a list that they put out together to that tells you what to buy and what not to buy. And I usually like to check in on that. But so that's how I feel with that. If I were looking at packaged goods, I am very, very reluctant to buy anything that's not organic that is a chickpea because chickpeas are sprayed so much with glyphosate or potentially paraquat before harvest. Is that pre-harvest desiccation that I was talking about?
Mm.
And Moms Across America did a test on Banza pasta, found excessively high levels that were so disconcerting, like had never seen such levels like that. And so I think chickpeas are definitely a concern. And a lot of farmers say that without that pre-harvest spray, they're going to be unable to grow them because it's just necessary in the weather where they are. So I think it's a safe bet just to avoid them.
Now, is there a safe level of glyphosate that we can consume, or we should be concerned about basically any levels?
I think being concerned about any level is important. But when you see some of these like residue tests where it's 10 parts per billion, which probably doesn't mean much to your listeners because it takes a while to learn the scale. But that actually isn't a ton. It's been shown to cause harm to a certain extent. And sometimes you'll see organic items that come up with about that level. That wouldn't be because of spraying. That's because it was in the air, the irrigation, the manure. So organic farmers, when they can't use synthetic fertilizers, instead they'll use manure. Well, the manure is sourced from the animal farms that eat GMO crops that have glyphosate in them. So then the poop has it in it, and then next thing you know, it ends up in the organic food. So that's how those traces get there. It's not because of a direct spray.
Mm.
So I've just kind of at first I just mentally was so worried to ever consume even anything at all about it, but truthfully, it's going to be really hard to avoid. So entirely. And so I've just come to accept that the best thing we can do is to try and limit it and just keep our body as healthy as possible around it with the decisions that we're making.
Yeah, it is really hard to get completely away from it when it's in our rain, it's in our water sources, it's in our soil, it's in the manure, it's in the food. It feels like everywhere we turn, it's there at some level. So, yeah, that is really difficult. So, explain to us why other countries have caught on to this idea, like Austria, Germany, some parts of Mexico. They don't allow glyphosate to be used, but the US just does. We keep turning a blind eye almost.
Yes. And you know what was surprising is I've been to France the last few years because I like to go on farm tours there. And I was really surprised to learn that many of them are using a lot of pesticides. Now
Wow.
they are happy to use glyphosate. They don't do pre-harvest spraying there, and they don't allow you to use it on landscapes, but farmers are definitely using it, and they're using other things that are really toxic. The but the key there being that in terms of actually impacting people and exposing people, if you're not spraying it on parks and landscapes, and if you aren't doing pre-harvest spraying, then it's going to be much more limited exposure to the human population. So the way that they're allowing farmers to do it, but like limiting the exposure to people is a much more responsible way. And there's actually a very famous in the glyphosate world microbiologist who has done a lot of studies on the microbiome and glyphosate exposure. And he worked out of London for a while. He published tons of papers on the impact of glyphosate on the microbiome. And when glyphosate was up for renewal in the EU, I think it was last year now, maybe 2 years ago, he actually came out and said he did not support a ban of glyphosate. And the reason why, which is, and I was all up in arms and worked up, I was like, how could he say that? Was he paid off by Bayer? No, the reason is because they just replace it with more toxic alternatives. So glyphosate is relatively less toxic than other alternatives. So for example, there have been tons of cancer trials where people have sued because they've gotten non-Hodgkin's lymphoma from exposure to Roundup. So Bayer, the manufacturer, because Bayer, by the way, the pharmaceutical company Bayer bought Monsanto in 2018. So now the pharmaceutical company owns the chemical company. And so they needed to get out from all this litigation. So they said, we're going to take glyphosate out of the home version of Roundup, and that will limit how many lawsuits there are. And so what they did is they did that, but they replaced it with Dicot, which is 40 times more toxic than glyphosate. So now the product that you can buy at Home Depot and Target, it may not have glyphosate, but it's much, much worse, like much worse. And so that's why it has to be, when we think about any bans, it kind of like you kind of just need to overhaul the system because they're always there on this chemical treadmill with something either worse or just as bad. So it's a real pickle.
And we are seeing a direct association between Roundup and cancer. Is that right? Like, this
Yes.
must have so much to do with our uptick in cancer that we're seeing across our country.
Oh, it absolutely does. And an enormous study just came out of Europe that was a 2 year study looking to see whether or not, because this is the perpetual question. And there's never been, until recently, there hasn't been a long-term study on Roundup, the formulated product. So that means the glyphosate plus that surfactant, that soapy substance surfactant, which in the case of the American version of it is considerably more toxic than the European Roundup because we're allowing the surfactant to be much worse that they banned it in Europe. And so this group at the Ramazzini Institute, which is in Italy, and they do lots of studies on environmental toxins, and they've done this 2 year study on whether or not glyphosate and Roundup formulations cause cancer. And they had just shocking, I mean, not shocking to me, but most people should be stunned to see the impact it's had on creating cancer, different types of cancer. I think it was 5 types of cancer. And so much so, and so rigorous was this study that now the European Commission is reopening that folder about whether or not they should be allowing Roundup to continue to be used. So that would be a step forward. But something really sad happened in France just yesterday. So even though France is using pesticides, as I say, the way that they use them and what they allow and don't allow is still considerably better than the United States. One of those pesticides that they had banned years ago, just on behalf of the pollinators, is something called a neonicotinoid. And the neonics, for short, are connected with the big pollinator bee collapse that we have in our country and globally. And so they got rid of that. They banned it. Well, the farmers in France, if anyone was noticing, they went and they did a big protest and they drove all of their tractors into Paris and they were saying, no, you need to give us freedom to use what we want. And unfortunately, a bill was just rammed through France that now is going to make it much, much easier to use toxic pesticides, even bringing back the neonicotinoids. And it was a really sleazy sleight of hand of the politicians and the chemical companies. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens there because one thing I've learned, and I've tried to get big rallies going on pesticides in the United States, and it is almost impossible to do it, even to the point when I got my start because I was covering the glyphosate Roundup trials. And so I was sitting in the courtroom blogging everything because mainstream media wasn't telling the truth. And so I did that. And on the last day when jury was deciding whether or not glyphosate caused this person's cancer, I tried really hard to get college kids. It was over in Oakland, California, so near Berkeley. And I called upon all the environmental groups. I'm like, can people come out and just rally us, do a protest outside the courthouse? Not one person showed up. And we just don't have any passion. I actually suspect it's because people feel sick and lazy in this country and just not up to it, and they don't feel as passionate, not realizing that this is killing their entire future. And but I hold hope because the French are famous activists for really pushing hard and being creative. And so I have hope for them that they'll be able to push back on it.
Now, help me understand. The French farmers wanted to use this really toxic pesticide. How come? Why would they want that? Do they not understand the repercussions that are going to happen to them and their families?
The same thing is happening there that's happening in the United States. So there are people, and I've spent a lot of time in the heartland with farmers that are spraying in the United States. And there is a cognitive dissonance between what they're actually experiencing and what they believe to be true. So, and when I come out from California, I'm not going to lecture them because they don't want to hear it from me, but it's more just information gathering. So, for example, there's a family I met with, all of the whole family's had cancer. And I asked, well, do you think the pesticides might have something to do with it? And they said, oh, no. The EPA wouldn't let us spray
Really?
something that would cause cancer. Oh, yeah. And I'm just like, oh my God. I mean, I feel heartbroken. I
Yeah.
feel heartbroken for them. And, in the infertility that's coming out of the heartland, and there's a great study that's going to start, that's underway actually, that's studying mother-child pairs from before pregnancy through, I think, age 3 to actually track what those effects are. Um, and document them, which is good. But there are other farmers who had their family, their wife, their kids get cancer, and they decide to make a change, and not necessarily to organic because that's a hard call, but you can do regenerative practices that can allow you to decrease how much money you're spending on inputs and heal the soil and decrease your exposure. And the sooner people can adopt that, the better. Now, the thing is, like, for a lot of these large farms that are really only in the business to collect the subsidies from that we all pay as taxpayers that only subsidize these chemical farms. So the things that we actually want to have grown by and large aren't subsidized by our government. And that is all just a political, ridiculous mess. And they aren't personally exposed to it. Like at the very most, if they don't have an applicator, do it. They are in that tractor cab, completely sealed off. They're not being exposed. They spray it. They collect their subsidy check. They're doing great. They have no reason to change because this is just the way they're making money. It's a similar thing in France where, unless they have some personal motivation, this is the way they're making money. They don't intend to change. It's much easier for them just to spray off the pest so they don't have to deal with it. They can guarantee a crop. Now, that's going to run out because when the soil's dead, which is happening now, the pesticides stop working as well. So, in the example with glyphosate, when farmers have been using it for so long, the weeds have actually been able to outthink glyphosate, and these super weeds are coming up now. So now they're having to layer on different pesticides. So now you have these GMOs that aren't just resistant to glyphosate, but it's 5 different pesticides because they have to layer on so many to kill nature that's outthinking it. And actually, I think that's kind of cool that the weeds are like, I wish humans were that resilient, but I don't think we are. So that's just really interesting to see. So basically, the treadmill is a dead end because those chemicals stop their effectiveness.
Man. Okay, talk to us about dead soil. Are you talking about soil that we have just put so much pesticide on that there's literally no nutrients that's left and nothing can grow from it?
Yeah, so this is most of our heartland. So what was just this gorgeous, rich soil has been fully depleted because of all this pesticide use, because of only planting the same crops, just not taking care of it, not keeping it covered, not caring for it like the living system that it is. And it has its own biome that is so vital to life. Like everything starts in the soil, and it's really beautiful when you really dig into it. But something like glyphosate was originally used as a metal pipe cleaner because it binds so closely and tightly to metals that you could put it into like a boiler, a pipe, and it would collect all the residue and you could flush it out. So it's doing that in the soil too. So when you spray glyphosate on the soil, it's binding to things like magnesium and zinc and all of these really vital minerals that we need in our bodies to function, but they're tied up there. And so now when you look around and you see the rage issues, emotional issues, and everyone seems to need an antidepressant and or like a Xanax and just so many problems, and you take a look at what is in our food now, are because our soil is so depleted, we do not have magnesium and zinc to the extent that we need it in our food system anymore. It's just not bioavailable. So then you have this explosion of the supplement market that is trying to like put it back into our bodies because it's so vital. So it's doing that. And what's so beautiful is when you see farmers decide they're going to start caring for their soil again, you see how the crop nutrient, and their scientists are testing this, you see that the nutrient density that comes back into the crop just after a few changes off of the pesticide and the synthetic fertilizer circle, you see just this beautiful restoration of ecosystems to the point that like various insects come back so that you're once you stop killing, all the insects, then you see this ecosystem return and you see the nutrients go back into the crops and you see birds come back that have been gone. And it's just like if you've seen Biggest Little Farm, it's like that, but it can be on a really large scale. And so it's very inspiring. If anyone ever has an opportunity to go tour a regenerative farm and they're around, you should just Google it and see what's near you because it is just, it's like you feel like God is there on these farms because God is allowing the soil to heal. And if we could just do this on a national scale, it would be so phenomenal. And in terms of the Make America Healthy Again movement, it's frustrating that I don't think we have any say in the USDA because that is where these changes need to be made. And you can do a lot on processed foods and limiting that and changing things over on that side. But if you are not going to be putting funds into soil restoration or these practices that aren't chemical based, then we're not going to be able to heal our bodies. So that's something that I've been working on. It's just frustrating.
Now, what is a safe alternative? So, can you maybe step us through what big farms would do? So, like, let's say a farm that had maybe 1,000 to 2,000 head of cow, right? So a family-run farm. So that's what my family has, right? It's like a family-run farm. So you're not talking about a big conglomerate, but you're also not talking about your backyard garden. But I would love to hear what average everyday, like me and my husband, could put on our backyard garden that would keep our plants from being eaten from pests and insects, but are also safe.
Yeah. And that's what's hard because it's hard to build the ecosystem. So, for reference, I have a garden that I'm actually in suburbia, but I took out all my grass and now I have like a full garden going. And over the last year, I started, I don't know if people are familiar with cover cropping, but this is something that they are doing on large scale, like thousands of acres now, that is allowing for this transition off of chemical inputs.
Mm.
So, in order to restore the health to the soil, you can do it by planting very specific things. So, things like hairy vetch, some different types of peas. There are a bunch of different types of plants that you can put there, and they will pull the nutrients from the air into the soil and allow the biome of the soil to flourish again. And farmers are going out and they're doing this and they're trying this and they're finding that carbon comes back into the soil, nitrogen, the amount of nitrogen that they have to supplement in fertilizers becomes much less. And so the less that you can disturb that soil. So for example, when I'm growing, I don't know, whatever it is, even my celery, when I'm growing celery, I actually don't pull it out from the root when I'm done with it. I cut it off at the base level of the soil because I'm trying to keep those roots intact because that's really what's key because now you have all these microbes that are like depending on those roots that are there. If you pull it out, then you're disrupting this ecosystem. So there are a bunch of things, yeah, in regenerative gardening that are very interesting on that. And I've also just those kinds of practices are big. There are some organic pesticides that you can use. I try and use them sparingly because once again, I'm trying to restore my ecosystem. But for example, like there are a lot of cucumber slugs that like I have to deal with, and there are some organic products that you can shake around them. That's what I do.
How do you feel about diatomaceous earth as, a deterrent for insects?
So I've used it for sure. I actually suspect my dog is allergic to it, so I haven't been able to use it to the same extent. And of course, like that means that she wants to go into it because she's allergic to it. So, but you know what I've really gotten into in turn because we have a big ant problem.
Okay.
And so what I've been doing is taking painter's tape and taping off all the crevices that I can see that they're very interested in. And once I have that taped off for like, say, 10 days, they lose interest and they'll go away. And then I'll bring it back. Or, certainly like fixing caulking or whatever it is, but that's not always possible. The other thing that I've been doing is using borax and putting it into peanut butter is one thing. If they're like ants that like savory, you can do sweet too with the borax, and that can be used too. So there are ways. It's just not as easy as going and picking up, the items at Home Depot and just killing it off.
Yeah, which isn't the goal, right? We want to kill only the things that we're targeting and not necessarily every single thing. It's kind of like antibiotics. It's like you want to kill the bacteria that we're targeting, but not all of your good microbiome. So that makes
Totally. Yeah, same thing. And I'm having a lot of luck in my garden. I know the farmers are doing this on a larger scale, just rotating what I'm growing each season so it's not the same thing each time. That's a big one. So crop rotation and then just your plant rotation in your plant boxes.
that makes sense. You're just like fueling that microbiome of your garden and your soil.
Yes. Yeah. And yeah, and then the pathogens that take root in, like say with tomatoes, just the pathogens that like tomatoes, they won't be able to thrive year after year and become so ingrained in my like planter box that, there's no getting out of it without spraying something.
Wow. Okay, that's so interesting. My next question is about baby food. It comes under fire a lot. A couple of years ago, we had this big scare that there were heavy metals. And, what do we need to know about pre-made baby food and or choosing foods if you are making your own baby food?
Yeah, the metals in the baby food was so awful. And what was crazy is I was part of a group that was also testing baby formula, and that came back so high for heavy metals. And we brought that to the former head of human foods, this guy Jim Jones, and he just dismissed it, and it was shocking. We marched it to different members of Congress. We're like, this needs to come out of baby formula. They didn't care. Like, it's just insane. But now that's being addressed with, I think it's Project Stork or something at HHS. So at least with formula, they're also going to be seeing to better regulation and testing around baby food for this reason. I think Once Upon a Farm,
Oh,
they do heavy metal testing. I really like their brand. I would also say just the same thing, that if you're going to be making your own, it's the same thing. Can you source locally? Can you get those products from your farmer's market? By and large, there aren't that many regenerative organic farms that are out there. And the thing with regenerative farms, once again, going back to soil health, it isn't necessarily organic, but it's going to have lower pesticide levels and very healthy soil. A lot of times, organic farms don't have healthy soil because they're tilling it. So, meaning that they're tossing it up, and that also destroys the microbiome of the soil. So, then the crops that grow in there actually aren't all that nutrient dense because that soil biome has been disrupted. So, if there are scientists out there that work in this field and they're big organic, passionate people, but they realize that they would rather have food that's maybe not organic, but is from a super solid regenerative farm because that was healthy soil that's going to give tons of nutrients and build the immunity of the human body when they eat them. So it gets really technical and confusing. Probably for your listeners, you're like, okay, now what? Like, so what I would say is for me, I still go to the farmer's market. I buy organic. If something is regenerative but not organic, ask the farmer how many pesticides are used. And they'll probably say very little. I don't have to use many pesticides anymore because my soil's healthy. And then it's like, okay, that's great. That's the ideal situation.
and also probably which pesticides they're using, understanding which ones they're choosing to put on their crops.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, wondering about that. And another thing, just because it popped into my mind, is orange juice. In these various juices, I would avoid any juices that are not organic because they tend to have very, very high levels of pesticide residue in them, and fungicides and herbicides and insecticides. And it's very sad because Florida was once this very, very famous for their citrus. And because they have abused their soil so much with so much spray and actually a lot of glyphosate spray around the tree of the oranges or the orange trees, they spray it, it goes down into the roots, it's picked up into the tree and then ends up in the oranges. And that's true for almonds, that's true for any real orchard or grove. So when you're thinking about juices for your kids or yourself, definitely make sure those are organic.
Okay, I'm not a big alcohol drinker, but you just talking about the way that the roots kind of pick it up and spit it out in the fruit makes me think about wines. So for our wine drinkers, should this be on their minds?
Yes, absolutely wine drinkers. And in fact, there's a study that was done by some sommeliers or scientists, had a group of sommeliers in France come and they were testing what they were tasting in the different wines. They were able to taste what pesticides were used on the vineyards in making the wines because they have different taste to them. Like, is that woody taste actually a pesticide or is it from the grape, you know? So sometimes what you're tasting is the pesticides. So once again, drink only organic wines. And a lot of people get headaches or have issues with wines. And then they find when they drink the organic wine, it's much less of an issue with reason because they're not being exposed. And, you know, grapes are really fragile, particularly if the ecosystem isn't really solid. And once again, if the soil isn't healthy and you're having to spray tons of fungicides so that you don't have these fungal outbreaks, then that's going to land in your wine.
I just imagine the next wine tasting I go to, I spin it around and go, smells like pesticides.
Exactly. That's what it is. Then they'd be like, oh, she knows her stuff.
Or they like, she's a psycho and
Oh,
she's
she's a
in
psycho, which
my
is my
environment.
world.
Oh, that is so funny. Okay, along the same idea of kind of, safe gardening and regenerative farming, what kind of yard care can we use that is safe for pets and children?
I have a friend who has developed a product that is now on the market. It's been EPA approved. It's called Firehawk bioherbicide. It's actually out of Australia. This works just as well as Roundup does, and it is non-toxic. It's safe for everyone to be around, and it actually is pro soil. So it can enhance soil. And it's so exciting that it's on the market. It was a really large feat to get it through the EPA because the EPA knows that it's effective. And so they tried to just basically bankrupt the company by taking, I think it was 4 years, 3 or 4 years to get it approved, which was ridiculous because it's basically acetic acid based. So that's something that you can definitely do. Now, for me, like I do still have a small patch of lawn, and I feel that without chemicals, I've just had to accept that it is a dandelion, clover, this and that, and it doesn't look fantastic. But it's not terrible either, and I've just made peace with it, which is I think what a lot of Americans kind of need to do, that it doesn't need to be totally perfect. And it's much better to have it safe, particularly if you have animals and kids running around on it.
Well, yeah, and also like that's our earth. Let her be whatever she needs to be. I feel much like you where I'm like, do we have to curate her to be what we want her to be? Can't we just kind of let her be her natural state? How do you feel about the brand Pesty?
I actually don't know Pesty. What is Pesty?
Oh, okay. So that's what our family uses right now. I did a lot of research into it because I'm kind of a crazy dog mom, and this is well before I was pregnant. And my husband is a crazy lawn guy. And so we had to find a crossroads where he felt good in what he was putting on our lawn, and it was giving him the results that he wanted. But I felt okay with our dog being outside 8 or 10 hours a day because he loves being outside, and his favorite activity is doing what I call snuffling through the grass. And so he will just spend hours just like snuffling through. And so his nose is exposed and his mouth is exposed, and he rolls in the yard all the time. It's like him living his best life. And so I knew that whatever was on our grass was going to touch every inch of his body. And Pesty
Totally.
is one of the cleanest products I've been able to find on the American market. And yeah, it seems to be a really kind of clean brand. It's essential oils. There doesn't seem to be anything icky in it, but like I say, I'm kind of new to this game. We've only been using it for maybe 3 summers now. So my knowledge on this is quite shallow, maybe deeper than some people's, but I certainly don't claim to be an expert. But Pesty for me has been a good option. I was just wondering if there was anything that you knew about it.
Yeah, I'm so surprised that I don't know. Now I'm gonna have to do a deep dive into it because I haven't seen it on the list of clean things, but that doesn't mean it's not. That's awesome.
Yeah, please do. So we use their lawn care, and they've got some grub spray that we use as well. And then they have actually a flea and tick spray for dogs, and you just spray it directly on your dogs, and it's just water and essential oils. It's something I have felt comfortable doing, so I'll be interested to see what you grade it.
Yeah, totally. I'll check it
Well,
out.
nice. Okay, I kind of want to end on circling back to where we began, which is Monsanto. They are the company that prompted that movie about the farmer whose cows went really crazy and started having all of these different symptoms. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I think that was one of theirs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So did they just straight up lie to farmers about it being safe to drink? Do you think that they knew? Was it nefarious? Because that movie certainly portrays them as a nefarious company. I think that we have every right to be skeptical of them, knowing the things that they've done to the American people and to our food sources, and by gaslighting the farmers who have tried to bring up these concerns. So, do you believe that Monsanto just straight up lied to us?
100% they straight up lied. 100%. And the way I can justify that claim is because of all this evidence that came out during the cancer litigation. And so Monsanto had to hand over just boxes and boxes of files about all of their inner workings, everything it had to do with glyphosate. And what was found in there is that they were actually ghost writing research to then provide to the EPA, that acting like it was independent, that would claim that glyphosate doesn't cause cancer. They did this, they paid them off, they submitted it. The EPA relied on that research to continue to say that this chemical was not a carcinogen. And then you saw more documents where they're in cahoots with the EPA to make sure that it stays on the market, even though all this evidence is coming out that shows that it's a carcinogen. And then, so far as to mess with laboratory studies retroactively to make it look like tumors didn't grow in the rats when they were exposed to glyphosate. It was so revolting to see the level of corruption, and knowing that the same with atrazine happened, where Tyrone Hayes, he's a scientist over at UC Berkeley, and Syngenta, which is now owned by ChemChina, hired him to look at endocrine disruption because he had a bunch of frogs. So he was having the frogs exposed to the same level that humans are exposed to, and found that they literally were changing sexes when they were exposed to it. So that ovaries were forming inside of testes, like really messed up his frog study. Okay. And so he reported this to Syngenta. Syngenta said, "Oh, you can't go public with that. We want to cut this study." And he said, "No, I'm still going to publish it." And so he said, "We're still going to publish it." And then Syngenta came after him, and there was a big article, I think in the Atlantic, about all these things that were made public that Syngenta did to him, including threatening his 9-year-old daughter, saying things like, "We're going to show you what it means like to be gay," like all kinds of things. Horrible one after him. And kudos to him for continuing, and he published it. But that is another example of it. There's a whole dark ops like that exists around agricultural chemical companies, where they operate using different spy agencies, oftentimes I think in cahoots with the State Department, to make sure that their chemicals can stay on the market. In my case, when I was covering the Monsanto trials, they hired a girl to come and act like she was a mom blogger, but it turned out she was actually hired by Monsanto to keep an eye on me and influence what I was saying. So it's nuts. I know my phone was hacked at a point, and like things were disappearing off of my blog. It is so corrupt. And in comparison to the other lobbies, I think that there is no comparison, because this is the darkest group of people that are insistent on keeping these things that are killing all life on the market.
Which is absolutely insane because their very base job is to protect life, human life particularly. Like, your only task is to keep us safe. And it is terrifying to think that now big pharma and big farm slash chemical slash our state government agencies are all colluding together to almost make us sick. They know these
Yeah.
things are harming us and they are willingly doing it.
They are willingly doing it. And that's where, when you hang out in these circles long enough, it's like, is it intentional or is it just a money grab? Like, what is it? And like, I still fall on the end of the day, if people can make money, that they'll do whatever. And there are certain people that are just evil people. And it's just so sad that a lot of them are able to hold so much control. And this is something that I hope we can start to change in our government in terms of who we're electing, because right now, we're in a real crisis with it because I don't know if your listeners have heard, but the chemical companies are now trying to pass an immunity shield so that if you get sick from pesticide exposure, you can't sue the chemical companies. It's
Just
an
like the
immunity shield.
vaccine companies.
Same thing as the vaccine companies. And so they're going state by state and trying federally to do this. So it passed in Georgia a few months ago.
Oh
In Georgia, you
no.
can no longer sue if you get sick from pesticides, or actually over 10,000 chemicals. You can't sue if you get sick from them. And then they passed it in North Dakota. They're trying to pass it in North Carolina. Florida's holding strong. Oklahoma's holding strong. And now we're seeing it, they're trying to slide it into a spending bill in DC. And it's terrifying because there are many, many of our elected officials that are fully willing to sign on to that, fully willing. And I think it's more than half. So we really may be screwed. And now Cory Booker, I've worked with his office a lot on pesticide things, and he is hopefully going to be launching a bill that's going to counteract it, which would be fabulous. But we really need to have bipartisan rallying around the fact that we need to preserve our rights to be able to sue chemical companies, because nothing's going to hold them in check. It'll be the same thing as the vaccine makers, where why not make it less safe? Because they won't be sued.
Well, the thing is, if you're putting out a pure and safe product, then you don't need that immunity from litigation because your product won't be making people sick because you've put out a pure and safe product. For them asking for immunity, it almost for me is an admission of guilt that says, we know our stuff is harmful, still
Yes.
don't want you to come after us.
Yeah, exactly. That's what that means. Otherwise, they wouldn't need it.
Wow, that is annoying and frustrating and so scary and just like
And what's so scary about it
diabolical.
is once it's passed, people are like, oh, well, you can sue. Well, you can, but who's going to pay for that lawsuit against the pharmaceutical chemical companies? Like, no one can afford it. They're going to win. So
Right.
it really just stops with our elected officials. Are they going to do the right thing?
So is that the control that we have? Is that the action that we take? We start getting really serious about the people that we're voting for and putting in these positions?
So I used to not be political, and I thought that it just is consumer behavior and consumer choices. Now that I've dug in more deeply, I think that is really what is going to have to happen. Like, our country conscience needs to really raise to a point where we're going to decide we're going to prioritize this and hold those elected officials accountable. And unfortunately, there are a lot of roadblocks with that, because if you want to know if pesticides hurt you, or like let's even say glyphosate, and you put it into a search engine, you might get a few, you'll hit my website, you'll hit a few people, but by and large, you're going to see the EPA come up that says everything's fine. You see all these front groups that the chemical companies have paid that sound very sciencey, like the Genetic Literacy or like Cornell Alliance for Science, and all of them are paid off by the chemical companies to say that there isn't a problem. So it's hard to raise public awareness when someone is like, oh, that's interesting. Let me go and see what Kelly just said is right. And there's immediately all this fake news there that says, oh, no, that's a conspiracy theory. It's just so frustrating. It's like, okay, well, I guess you don't have to believe it, but unfortunately, we won't be able to have grandkids. You know, I mean, it's just so sad.
Yeah, it really is. And I hate to always be the one that is reminding people that our government doesn't care about us, that they don't have our best interest at heart, that they genuinely don't give a damn about the American people. And I truly do believe that, as harrowing as it is, I do believe that Washington is out for themselves. They are out for blood and they are out to deepen their own pockets and they are out for control. And when you get there, once you have your eyes open and you've seen the things that you see in Washington, you can't unsee it.
That's the problem. And what's so funny is once again, I came from a military family. I love this country. When I first started looking into it, I was like, oh my gosh, look at all this stuff that glyphosate is doing to the gut. Oh my goodness, that's why people are having so many food sensitivities. Oh, I need to go tell the EPA. I bet they'll care. I mean, that's really what I thought because I had that much trust in our institutions. I'm like, well, they must not know. I just need to tell them. Not that they very much know, and they're making sure that people like me are shut down and quieted. So it's really a shocking wake up call when you get to that point. It's sad. It's just sad. But it then makes you turn and just decide you're going to be more resilient and responsible for yourself and your family, which is something you can do to a large extent. And that's empowering.
Yeah, that is empowering. And that's the whole point of this podcast. That's the point of this community is to teach people A, how to recognize the corruption and the manipulation, and B, what can you do about it to protect yourself and your family. So, oh my gosh, Kelly, this has been such an enlightening conversation. I really appreciate you being here. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you're like, all right, these people really need to know this?
Let's see, there are always so many things. I think I came to this world because I got sick. So I had an autoimmune condition, and that's what opened my eyes to all of this. And I think that a lot is very hard right now in the world. And my kids had chronic illnesses and they've had to deal with it functionally and now they're doing well. And I think remembering the body's natural ability to heal is important to keep reminding yourself even in the darkest times because the body knows and the body is connected with God and nature knows. And if you just try and leave room for that, I think that you can really heal.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that resonates so deeply with me. I trust our body. I live in complete awe of our body. I always have. And then I got into birth work and it deepened. And now I'm growing my first baby and it's even deeper.
Yay!
And
Oh, that's the deepest time.
yeah, I feel like I am just on this really radical rocket ship to, I don't know, really uncovering a ton of the deception that the American people face and helping people wake up to it when they're ready. I'm not going to force you to go down any rabbit holes that you don't want to go down, but once you're ready and you come to me and you say, I think something smells fishy about this, I'll say, yeah. It does, and here's why, and here's what you can do about it to keep you and your family safe.
So happy that you are doing this podcast because, particularly now that I have teenagers, you have an important role to be educating people of your age in this next decade of having babies. So thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, thank you for joining me. Look, this podcast would not be anything. It'd just be me chatting by myself every week
Well,
if
that's valuable too.
if I didn't have people like you joining me on the show, I don't think the show would be worth very much. So, thank you so much for your wisdom and your knowledge and sharing all of the things that you've uncovered. And thank you for giving us actionable steps. I really do appreciate it. If people wanted to learn from you or they wanted to connect with you online, how can they do that?
You can find me at Glyphosate Girl on Instagram. So that's Glyphosate Girl, Glyphosate Girl. And that's where I put out most of my information. I also have the website Glyphosate Facts, and that's where you can go to learn the truth. And I deliberately named it that because there are a lot of competing websites that try and give you misinformation. But Glyphosate Facts, you'll find everything accurate and more about what I talked about today. And on Twitter, I am also Glyphosate Girl.
I absolutely love that. And fun fact, just to round this out, you guys, once we booked Kelly, we knew her real name, and I see it on your Instagram. But my team and I behind the scenes, we still refer to you as Glyphosate Girl. I just think that is, I think it's such a cool name, and it just I envision you in my brain as like this superwoman, and you have this cape behind you that says Glyphosate Girl, and you're flying through the air, like protecting us all from glyphosate, and I just love it. So truly, Kelly, thank you so much for being here. You guys, if this is the first time you have heard about glyphosate, then I'm glad that you heard this episode. If this is not the first time you've heard about it, but you weren't really sure where to go, Kelly just gave you so many resources that you can start to A, get rid of glyphosate in your life, and B, start to replace those things with something a little healthier and cleaner for your family. Thanks so much for being here, everyone. I'll see you in the next episode. Be sure to follow Kelly on social media. You can find me at Tranquility by Hee and at the.birth.lounge. Until next time, head to your app store and download the Birth Lounge app for evidence-based childbirth education and data-driven postpartum support delivered straight to your phone. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I love hanging out with you, and it is an honor to be your go-to gal when it comes to preparing for your baby. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a 5-star review and tell others why they should be listening to the Birth Lounge podcast too. You deserve to have a birth that you love with a provider that values your autonomy and respects informed consent without all the trauma that you so commonly hear about on social media. New episodes air every Wednesday and Friday. Hit that follow button so you never miss an episode. I'm Hee, and this is the Birth Lounge Podcast.